Good evening and welcome to tonight's event. I'm Jonathan Rowson. I direct the Social Brain Centre here at the RSA. I've had a long-standing interest in Carol's work. Thank you for coming on such a beautiful evening. I thought that was because of our wonderfully famous and brilliant speaker, but Carol herself said it's just because the audience knows you have good air conditioning. So I hope you're enjoying the relative sort of gentle atmosphere in here. Please turn off your phones if you can, or rather put them to silent, because we do encourage tweeting. So if you want to keep your phone on silently while talking to the world, that's fine, but we don't want them buzzing or beeping during the talk. And a reminder that this event will be podcast. There'll be a podcast of this event and a video after the event. It's being recorded, so you can share it with friends and family or whoever else in a few days' time. For those who are tweeting, the hashtag is #RSA Mindset. So that's the official notice is over. Now, Carol Dweck is widely regarded as one of the world's leading researchers in the fields of personality, social psychology, and developmental psychology. She is the Lewis and Virginia Eaton Professor of Psychology at Stanford University, and she recently won the Distinguished Scientific Contribution Award from the American Psychological Association, one of the highest awards in psychology. For my own part, being the director of the Social Brain Centre, I know that whenever you mention brain, people think fixed, they think permanent. And the real sort of fascination of Carol's work is that it pushes in the opposite direction, sort of suggesting that, not to steal Carol's thunder, but that one of the most fundamental aspects of human nature is just how much we can change it. So it's a great pleasure to have you here, Carol, and without further ado, Professor Carol Dweck.
Thank you. It's a tremendous pleasure to be here with you this evening. We all come like this, infinitely curious, always experimenting, always learning, and addressing the most difficult tasks of a lifetime with tremendous gusto. You never see an unmotivated baby. No. And yet, just a few years later, you start seeing lots of kids who look as turned off as that baby. Not so different from the baby. But what we have now discovered is that mindsets are at the heart of this kind of problem. Mindsets that make kids afraid to try and make them easily derailed by setbacks. But what's important is that we are also discovering why this happens and what to do about it. In my work, we find that some students have a fixed mindset about their intellectual abilities and talents. They think intelligence is just a fixed trait. You have a certain amount, and that's that. This is the mindset that makes kids afraid to try because they're afraid to look dumb. But other students have a growth mindset. They believe that intelligence can be developed through their effort, dedication, learning, and mentorship from others. They don't think everyone's the same or that anyone can be Einstein, but they understand that even Einstein wasn't the guy he became before he put in years and years of dedicated labor. What I'm going to talk about today is how these mindsets work and how they can be changed. How do they work? They work by creating a whole psychological world for students where everything has a different meaning. And I'd like to take you through those worlds now in terms of 3 mindset rules. So if you're ready, here we go. I'm going to organize this by telling you about a study we did with hundreds of students making the transition to 7th grade. They're about 13 years old. It's an extremely difficult transition. The work gets substantially harder. The grading gets more stringent. The environment becomes less personal. And that's a crucial time. It's a time when many students turn off to school. And you start to see lots of declining grades. So as they entered, we measured their mindsets. That is, we saw whether they believed intelligence was fixed or could be developed. We monitored their grades in math over the next 2 years. We also measured a lot about their attitudes toward learning. Now, look what happened. They had entered 7th grade with just about identical achievement test scores. But by the end of the first term, their grades jumped apart and continued to diverge over the next 2 years. The only thing that differed were their mindsets. Now, let's see why and how this happened. The first thing we found after the math grades was that they had completely different goals in school. The number one goal for kids in a fixed mindset is look smart at all times and at all costs, and above all, never look dumb. So their whole lives are oriented toward avoiding tasks that might show a deficiency. But in a growth mindset, where they believe intelligence can be developed, their cardinal rule is learn at all times and at all costs. And you can see how a focus on learning would create greater achievement. We found the same thing in pre-medical students at an elite university in the US. They cared about grades because they weren't going to get through the pre-med curriculum without them. But those with the growth mindset said they cared even more about learning. And our analyses showed that because of their emphasis on learning, they actually earned higher grades in their organic chemistry course. They studied more deeply, and if they had a setback on their original exam or two, they did everything in their power to recover. We're finding the same thing in our research in Fortune 500 companies. Those employees who have a fixed mindset say they want to be the smart ones. They want to be the star of any team they're on. They always want to be right there in that culture of genius. But those with a growth mindset say they care first and foremost about learning, even more than garnering the accolades. That brings us to the second, whoops, I pushed the wrong one. But I have a growth mindset. The second mindset rule is about effort. In a fixed mindset, effort is a bad thing. They believe if you have ability, you shouldn't need effort. And if you need a lot of effort, it's a sign that you don't have ability. They subscribe to Homer Simpson's motto, trying is the first step toward failure. I believe that belief, that if you have ability, you shouldn't need effort, is one of the worst beliefs that anyone can have. I think it's why so many of our promising students don't fulfill their potential. They go along, coasting along, not trying that hard. The other kids have to try. One day they have to try too, and they can't do it. Whereas students in a growth mindset say, effort is what activates their ability. It allows them to use it to the fullest, and it increases their ability over time. They understand what psychological research is showing, that even geniuses have to work super hard for their great discoveries. In fact, in many cases, their hard work is what made them geniuses. And rule number 3, in a fixed mindset, A setback or deficiency measures you and reveals your limitations in fixed ability. So what we find is that those students in a fixed mindset try to hide their mistakes or run from their mistakes, conceal their deficiencies. But those in a growth mindset think mistakes, setbacks, natural part of learning. It's what happens when you take on challenges. So their view is capitalize on mistakes, confront your deficiencies. We saw this in action with our 7th graders. We asked them what they would do after a disappointing score on the first exam in a new course. And here's what they said. Those with a fixed mindset said, I'd spend less time on the subject from now on. I would try to cheat on the next test. Think about it. The poor score meant they didn't have ability. They don't like or believe in effort. Cheating becomes a more attractive option. But those in the growth mindset recognized it was the first exam. There was a lot more they could do. They said, I'd work harder in this class from now on. I'd spend more time studying for the tests. Do you want to see how this works in the brain? Let's take a look. In this study by Jason Mosier and his colleagues, they measured the electrical potential from the part of the brain where errors are processed. These students worked on a task, periodically made errors. On the right, you see the brain activity of growth mindset students. All that red hotness is telling you they detected the error, they processed it, and they corrected it. But look at that brain on the left. That's the fixed mindset brain. You hardly see anything. As soon as there's an error, they run from it as quickly as possible. They're not processing it, they're not correcting it. The good news is that when these students were taught a growth mindset, they started looking like the brain on the right. So it's not an inherent property of a person's brain. It's whether you see errors as something you flee from or something that you learn from. So a fixed mindset gives no way for students to handle difficulty. They may get discouraged, give up, flee, or become defensive, acting bored. Often this statement, it's boring, it's a cover for a fixed mindset. It means I'm afraid to try, or acting out, blaming the teacher or material. So you can see, not wanting to look dumb, not liking effort, fleeing from difficulty. You can see how this would lead to lower achievement in the long run. How are these mindsets transmitted? We've studied this in a number of ways, but maybe the most interesting way is through praise. For 15 years, we have studied how adults' praise affects students. We undertook this work at the height of the self-esteem movement, when the gurus were telling us all to praise our children's ability, tell them how brilliant and talented they are. But for 15 years, we have found praising children's intelligence harms them. It puts them into a fixed mindset and turns them off to challenging learning. Let me tell you about a series of studies we did with 10 and 11-year-olds. We brought them one at a time, and we did the study 6 times because the results were so striking. We brought them to a room in their school. We gave them 10 problems from this nonverbal IQ test initially. They did pretty well because they were matched to their age level, and each child received one form of praise. A third of them got intelligence praise. Wow, that's a really good score. You must be smart at this. Or process praise. That's about the process they engaged in. Could be their strategy, their effort, their focus, their persistence. Here we just praised effort. Wow, that's a really good score. You must have tried really hard. And the control group. Wow, that's a really good score. I won't talk much about them because they tended to be in the middle. Now, if you listen carefully to the messages that are embodied in each statement, the first one says, I value intelligence. The second says, I value process. Let's see what happened. First, yes, indeed, praising intelligence put kids into a fixed mindset compared to praising the process. But the most astonishing thing to us was that praising intelligence turned kids off to learning. Because after we praised them, we said, what do you want to do now? Anything's fine with us. You want a hard task you can learn from, but you might make mistakes? Or do you want a task that's like something you're already good at, so you're sure to do well? The majority of kids who were praised for their intelligence rejected the chance to learn in favor of something they were sure to do well on. I like to say they didn't want to risk their newly minted gifted label. But those praised for the process overwhelmingly wanted the hard task they could learn from. They didn't feel they were in jeopardy if they struggled for a while before they caught on. Later, we gave everyone a difficult set of problems. And here we found that those who were praised for intelligence lost their confidence, didn't enjoy the problems anymore. And even when we went back to the easier problems, their performance suffered. Those who were praised for the process remained confident. They saw these problems were harder. Many of them said the hard ones were their favorites, and when we went back to the easier ones, their performance flourished because they remained engaged and they remained learning on the difficult problems. A few months ago, we published a study showing that mothers praise to their babies 1 to 3 years of age predicted that child's mindset and desire for challenge 5 years later. So now I feel justified when I intervene with mothers at airports who are telling their babies that they're geniuses. I have the data. And Eva Pomerantz and our colleagues are finding the same thing with older kids. Parental praise is predicting the child's mindset and desire for challenge. So remember, praise process. But it's even more than that. It's convey to children a new value system. Not about quick, easy, smart things, but like this. Sit around the dinner table and say, who had a fabulous struggle today? And each person shares the struggle. What are you going to struggle with tomorrow? Or if a child does something quickly and easily, instead of rushing to tell them how good they are at it, we should say, oh, I'm sorry I wasted your time. Let's do something hard. Let's do something you can learn from. And the new value system is easy. That's boring. That's a waste of time. Hard. That's worthwhile. That's fun. Recently, I have fallen in love with a new word, yet. I heard of a high school in Chicago where when they didn't master a unit, instead of a failing grade, they got the grade not yet. And I thought, isn't that great? Because not yet means, hey, you're on that learning curve. You're somewhere, not at the finish line, but you're somewhere on the learning curve. And so if a child says, I'm not good at maths yet, it's like, get back on that learning curve. I can't do it yet. I tried, but it didn't work yet. When we saw that a growth mindset had so many benefits, we asked, could we teach it? And we did. So in one of our first studies, the control group, which you see on the bottom, got 8 sessions of great study skills that teachers said were important that year. But the growth mindset group got 8 sessions of study skills with the growth mindset. The growth mindset sessions kicked off with this article, You Can Grow Your Intelligence. New research shows the brain can be developed like a muscle. And they learned that every time they pushed out of their comfort zone to learn something new and difficult, the neurons in their brains formed new connections, and over time, they could get smarter. Look what happened. The students who just learned the study skills, these are 7th graders already showing declining grades in math, those with just the study skills continue to show declining grades, but those who learned the growth mindset with the skills showed a sharp rebound in their grades. Is it ever too late? We did a study in 13 high schools around the US, and we focused on the lowest achieving students, the lowest thirds, the ones that the schools give up on. And we sent them over the internet, they did 2 growth mindset sessions. They learned about the brain, how it grows through learning, and how they could put that into practice. The control group just learned about the brain and about memory improvement, but not the growth mindset. Look what happened. After only 3 months, the grade point average, and that's across every subject, average, was significantly higher in the growth mindset group than the control group. And look at this. The control group was passing fewer and fewer courses, but those in the growth mindset group were passing more and more courses. We also, I should mention, did a study of kids from the top charter schools. About 90% of them in these top charter schools get into university, but only 30 to 40% get through. We taught the graduating high school students, half of them, we taught a growth mindset, not just about their intelligence, but about know-how, about making their way in the new university environment, which many kids from poorer backgrounds don't know how to do. So get them thinking about initiating ways to capitalize on opportunities in their environment. We found that more than 20% more, or about 20% more, of the students in the growth mindset condition were still at university by the end of their first term than those in the control condition. Is a growth mindset for everyone? Stephanie Freiberg, a professor in the US, went back to her Native American reservation where she grew up, and she started trying to transform the grade school, the elementary school, in terms of a growth mindset. It didn't take at first. They didn't really care about getting smarter. What's that? What's that going to do for us? But when she gave it a cultural framing, a cultural meaning, saying, and then you can really help your family and community contribute to them better, it just took hold and took off. The teachers and the parents were brought into the intervention. This elementary school was 90% minority, and that school was in the bottom percent bottom 5% of the state in achievement. After a year to a year and a half of growth mindset immersion in the community, the kindergartners and first graders now lead the district in oral reading fluency. And it's actually quite an affluent surrounding district in the Seattle area. Third grade, on the state literacy test, over 2/3 of them met or were within 10 points of standard. Most of those students had been more than 100 points below standard in the fall. And third to fifth grade, most of the students were showing more than a year of growth in literacy and math. And many of them were showing 1.5 to 2 years of growth. But the most exciting thing was the students were now believing and expressing the idea that their potential as Native students is unlimited. I want you to feel something. Effort and difficulty. In a fixed mindset, students tell us that's when they feel dumb. But when students learn a growth mindset, they know effort and difficulty. Those are the times their brains are forming new connections and they're getting smarter. Can you feel that difference? I want to end with some striking new findings by Leslie, Simpian, and Meyer. They asked whether mindsets could shed light on gender and minority representation in academic disciplines. So here's the proportion of women getting PhD across what we call STEM disciplines: science, technology, engineering, and maths. And you can see how it declines as you get from biology to maths, engineering, computer science, and physics. What they did was a national survey of scholars in those disciplines to find out from professors and graduate students what brings success in your discipline. Did they believe being a top scholar, let's say in maths, requires a special aptitude that just can't be taught? Or did they believe when it comes to maths, the most important factors for success are motivation and sustained effort? Raw ability is secondary. The more a discipline believed in a fixed mindset, that it was sheer brain power that could not be taught, the fewer women and minorities were in that discipline. Conversely, the more they held a growth mindset, the more there were women and minorities in the discipline. Apparently, women do not see this culture of genius as hospitable or amenable to them. So in summary, growth mindset and growth mindset environments allow students to embrace learning and growth instead of worrying all the time, will they look clever or not? It allows them to understand that effort creates talent rather than believing if you have talent, you shouldn't need effort. And it allows them to stay resilient in the face of setbacks instead of running from errors. And best of all, it can be taught. I'd like to end with this final thought. The more research shows us that human abilities are capable of growth, the more it becomes a basic human right for students to experience that growth, to live in environments in which all students can fulfill their potential. Thank you.
thanks very much, Carol. In a moment, I'll open it up to everyone. I'm sure there are lots of questions. I want to ask a few myself. The first is kind of, at the heart of this, there's a binary. There's a kind of divide between growth and fixed. Now, I want to sort of, there's a joke that, the world's divided into those who believe there are basically two kinds of people and those who don't. And you've probably heard that one before, I'm sure. But how much have you been, how confident are you in the construct validity? How sure are you that these two divide, and how much overlap is there between them?
Yes. So I'm not a person who believes the world can be divided into two kinds of people. It's really more of a continuum. And actually, we can slide along that continuum based on the situation we're in. When we do our research, we often divide people into those who predominantly believe in one mindset or predominantly believe in the other. And I talk that way for simplicity.
Sure. No, of course. But how fluid are they? I mean, when you say a person with a growth mindset or a person with a fixed mindset, that's not a life sentence, right?
No, it's not a life sentence. It can be fluid.
And can it go back the way as well? Can you develop a growth mindset and lapse?
You can lapse if the environment isn't supporting that. And also, you can have a different mindset in different areas. That's very, very common. You can think athletic ability, I can develop that, but intellectual ability, you have it or you don't.
Okay. And in terms of teaching, you say it can be taught.
Absolutely.
But the way you presented it there, it sounded like you were teaching at the level of kind of information, the sort of know that of growth and fixed. To what extent does this sort of get under the skin and become dispositional, and how does that come about?
Yes. Well, we have students do exercises as they're receiving the information. For example, they summarize the evidence for growth mindset in their own words, or they write a letter to a struggling student or friend of theirs, encouraging them in terms of a growth mindset. So we really create this personal engagement as they are receiving the material.
So it becomes experiential, I guess.
Exactly.
I guess the only thing with that is, I mean, if the children become informed of these two different ways of being, even with all the provisos that you mentioned, is there a danger that sometimes when you say, very well tried, good effort, praising the process, that the child thinks you're only saying that because you think I'm not very smart? Is there a danger?
You have to praise the process within a growth mindset. Because if you're just exhorting someone to try and they have that negative view of effort, it won't be effective. And if they try and then don't succeed, they'll feel even worse. It's got to have that growth mindset framework.
And how much of this is there a particular conception of intelligence at the heart of this? I mean, how would this change if you put it into, say, a multiple intelligence framework? Is there a sense in which it relies on an existing view of intelligence, or is it very adaptable?
I think it's pretty adaptable because we don't define intelligence for students. We just ask them whether they feel it can be developed or not.
Okay, I see. And you've recently moved beyond the education realm to apply this more broadly, I believe, particularly in the Middle East, with regard to how Israelis and Palestinians view each other. Can you talk a little more about that?
Yes, first I'll say, we've taken it in a number of directions. My colleagues and I have looked at aggression in the schools, willpower, prejudice, but now we've taken it into the Middle East.
How would they, I mean, can you flesh out for us how it would link to aggression or willpower or these things?
We went into a pretty bad high school where the staff said, don't bother, it's too late for these kids. But half the kids were taught that people don't do things because they're good or bad or have these fixed personalities. They do things because they have thoughts, feelings, insecurities that live in their brain and can be changed. And it just altered the way that they felt about themselves when something happened or felt about someone who might have excluded or bullied them. And so aggression in the school was substantially lowered.
And similarly, if the group that's normally seen as a threat, they might become slightly less threatening for the thought that they didn't have to be that way.
Yes, so in the Middle East, we taught Israelis and Palestinians that groups in general don't have a fixed nature, an evil nature, a violent nature. that groups are capable of change if the leaders change, if circumstances change. And we taught about groups historically who might have once been thought bellicose or evil and now seem perfectly normal. And what we found was just learning this different view about groups enhanced their attitudes towards each other and their willingness to consider major compromises for the sake of peace.
Gosh. And a quick straw poll if I can. How many teachers in the room, please, broadly conceived? So, right, so it's maybe about between a quarter and a third, I think. I ask that because one of the biggest challenges, I imagine, to your work is that a great deal of it's conducted in the lab. It's social psychology or development psychology done in a context that's very different from the classroom. How much of a challenge is it to make sense of that transition? I mean, you know what works in the lab. How confident can you be that it works in the classroom as well?
Well, most of our studies have been done in schools. Almost all the studies where we've changed students' mindsets have been done in schools, but we have delivered them. Because we wanted to show that if you tweak this mindset in a student's head, it has an impact, even if you haven't changed anything else about the school. But now we think it's terribly important to go into the schools, have teachers and staff participating to support these changes.
So it does matter to some extent who's conveying the growth mindset. Okay, great. For me, that's fine. I've got more in the bag, but I think there's so many people with questions. Let's open up. Right, we have Matthew from Twitter. Let's just reassure Twitter people that we are going to take their questions. So first of all, Matthew, and then I'll come to you in a second.
There are a few questions on Twitter, but if I could ask two of them?
Yeah.
Sure.
One came from Bob Marshall, and he asks, do organisations have a psyche and thus a collective mindset?
Yes.
Shall I tell you the other one first?
Let's go with that one first. It's quite a big one.
Yes, I'm so glad you asked that, Bob. We're studying that. We're studying Fortune 500 companies, and they do seem to have a predominant mindset according to their employees. It turns out that when employees perceive that their company has more of a growth mindset, they feel more satisfied, loyal. They say they're proud to work in that organization. When they see an organization as having more of a fixed mindset, they say there's a lot more competition going on. It's a culture of genius. People keep secrets in order to get ahead.
And the second one, too.
There are a couple of questions from Helen Nix, but I'll just ask one of them. Does the resilience in the face of setbacks equally apply to personal setbacks, for instance, family breakdown?
We haven't studied the kind of resilience that could get you through a family breakdown. But anecdotally, people have written to me and said that understanding the fixed mindset and that you're capable of growth and overcoming obstacles has helped them through personal crises. And there is a chapter in my book, Mindset on Relationships, that might speak to this issue.
Okay, great, thanks. So we had a couple. So, gentleman there, please, in the green. And there was one other. If we still have you, yeah, great, and in the front.
Hi, Carol. Thanks for your work. It's been a big influence on me, both professionally and as a parent. So hopefully you won't tell me off if we ever bump into each other in an airport. I just wanted to ask you more of a systems question. In the UK, I think we have an education system that's very much predicated on a fixed mindset, which you can see evidenced by standardised testing. We even have our chief inspector now suggesting that children should be tested before they get into school, and I suspect there won't be a not yet grading issued in those tests. So what if we had either our chief inspector or our education secretary here, and we were trying to persuade them that the education system needs to move more in the direction that your work is suggesting, what arguments would you make? How would you make the case for the approach that you're suggesting?
Great question, thanks.
Yes, great question. I would definitely have growth mindset characteristics built into the grading and assessment system so that students who took on challenges, persisted in the face of obstacles, or even in the classroom helped other kids learn would get credit for that.
And how precise would you have to make that? I mean, the worry there is that that's a very qualitative judgment, and
Yes.
that may be fine, that may be entirely appropriate.
Yes.
But to what degree would you want to make that formal?
We're creating behavioral assessments of these characteristics. And what's good about that is not just that lower performing students can get credit for effort and improvement, but that the higher performing students cannot coast to a top grade. They have to be challenging themselves. I don't know about your country, but we have an awful lot of very brittle, high-achieving students who often are not making it through university. And then I would say, while we have the high-stakes testing, as it is, students need to know that it is a snapshot of their skills at one moment in time. It does not measure their potential to learn and succeed in the future.
Just to push that a bit, because it's such a fundamental question. The students can receive that message, and good teachers may convey it to them that this result is not final, it's a not yet, or
Yes.
something of that nature. But the policymakers tend to have a somewhat different mindset, I think, which is a bit more risk averse, which
Yes.
it wants to be held to account in a certain kind of way. So at that level, where people are designing curricula and thinking of assessment, that's probably the point at which you have potentially the most influence.
Yes.
Is there anything more you can say about how you would persuade them to embody this growth mindset in those structures?
In the assessment.
Assessment and curricula, I suppose.
In the curriculum, it's relatively straightforward to incorporate the growth mindset. When we introduce a new unit, we convey that we believe everyone can learn this and that we are committed to have everyone learn this. We give growth mindset feedback throughout.
Right.
We chart students' improvement. So if they're confused or they feel like they're not getting something, we show them how they've progressed. They're not back to square one. We give pre-tests before a unit where everyone sees they don't know anything. They get used to getting it wrong, then see that they're getting it right.
So you almost sort of make them relax about not knowing anything from the start.
Build in
Okay.
the mistakes.
Okay, great, okay. And the question here at the front, please. And then we'll take one in a second. I just forgot to say, if you could introduce yourself before you speak. if possible.
Good morning, I'm a fellow. Do different national cultures influence mindsets and education systems?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Do different national cultures influence mindsets and educational system? East Asian cultures have a greater emphasis on effort across the board, but not necessarily more of a growth mindset. We just published work comparing not American Indian, but Indian culture to American culture. And more adults in India believe, many more adults, the majority of adults in India believe every baby is born with the potential to become a highly intelligent adult. I undertook this work with 2 students of Indian descent. I said, what about the caste system? They said it's not about intelligence. It's about other character kinds of things. And so that was really interesting. And we found that in American culture, the more you believed everyone had this kind of potential, the more you supported using funds for kids from poorer backgrounds or engaging in kinds of affirmative action.
And you said there, Carol, that just because you believed in promoting effort, it didn't follow that you didn't have a relatively fixed mindset. Can you say a little more about how that can be?
Yes. You can believe that effort can compensate for difficulties and make you achieve a little more than you would, even though you don't think it's making you smarter.
Okay,
It's like a sad fact of life that you need more effort than someone
so
else.
You have a fixed amount of intelligence,
Yeah.
but because you work, you might achieve just as
Yeah.
much as someone who has
Yeah.
more but works less. Okay, great. There's a question right at the front here, please. And then, sorry, I'll get you in a second.
Thank you. Mike Grenier, fellow. Can I just ask how important it is to coordinate in schools between parents, student bodies and the staff? I mean, I work at a very selective school, academically high-flying, but the fragility you mentioned is often because there's a disconnect between the language of the schoolroom and the language of the parents, and similarly might be the same elsewhere.
Yes, I hear this a lot, especially in high-flying schools. They feel that they're making progress getting some of these fragile students into a growth mindset, but it's being undermined by the parents saying, my child is a special genius, and why did you put red marks on my child's paper? So it is extremely important for schools to coordinate with parents to bring them in. The parents want the best for their kids, but they're stuck in that self-esteem movement belief that you're encouraging confidence and perseverance by telling them how brilliant they are. So they need to know this. There's there was an article in New York Magazine, February 2007, on our praise work that really wakes parents up. So bring them in, teach them the growth mindset, teach them about praise, get them as allies, because deep down they know that the praise they've been using isn't working.
Okay, great. And there's a question in the middle of the middle.
I'd like to find out from you how you would either include or draw a line to how your work and general work on the response to stress with either adrenaline or cortisol being formed at those stress positions.
Yes.
And whether the resilience that you talk about is actually the person's ability to understand their response situation and therefore improve their response in the situation.
Yes. So we think that many of our effects are coming from teaching people a new way of construing adversity. For example, in our intervention with aggression, we've shown that we're teaching those kids a new way of conceptualizing the adversity they experience, and we are showing it's lowering their stress in the face of an exclusion event. It's lowering their global stress over the school year, and it's lowering their cortisol levels, we've just found.
So it's this approach to education is also potentially a way of reducing stress in general.
Yes, and with reduced stress is coming increased health.
Great. And you'd understand that because in a sense you're saying adversity is the norm, not the exception, or there's nothing wrong with you because this is happening, or how would you explain it?
Exactly. What we found is that when students have a fixed mindset, and someone excludes them or bullies them, they think, that's a bad person, I hate them. I'm a loser, I feel like a loser. I feel shame. And we have seen that it turns into a seething desire for violent revenge.
Gosh.
Even in upper middle class samples. So we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg with some
So there's a lot of sort of festering rage going on.
festering rage.
Okay.
But that learning the growth mindset seems to say, hey, here's a person who doesn't know how to cope. I'm a person who doesn't always know how to cope.
Right. Okay. So we have one more question here, and we're moving towards the end now. So if you think you might have a question, now is the moment to show your hand, so we can try and get you all in before we end. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, and we'll take them together, please, because we're coming towards the end. Yes. So if you can go first, please.
Hi there. I can't quite see you, Carol, behind the lectern. Sarah Wallbank from Yes Futures. We are a social enterprise that works to build confidence and resilience in young people. So I'm really interested in your work and what you've just been saying about building, kind of reducing stress, and also what you mentioned in your talk about resilience. I'm also keen to learn about the confidence part, and it does seem to me as though the growth mindset would naturally lead to improved confidence and improved self-esteem. Is there any evidence to suggest that's
Okay,
the
can we
case?
hold that question? So confidence and self-esteem, we have one. We'll just take a few together if that's okay, just so we can get them all
Okay.
in. So confidence, self-esteem is a big one. One behind you there, please. Don't worry, I'll keep track of them so that we'll be sure to answer them all.
Hi, yeah, I can see a lot of positives about the growth mindset. I wonder whether there are ever any downsides. It seems like this is really the American dream, that all you have to do is try harder and try
Yes.
harder and try harder. And I wonder whether that ever places people at
Downsides,
risk.
okay. Great, thank you. And then one here at the front, please, or whoever can get the mic first. Yeah, thanks.
Hi, Martin Robinson. You've come to us on the day that a new national curriculum has been announced.
Just worried someone would ask about that.
Just wondered what you thought of, probably in America, is the Ed Hirsch approach, the knowledge-based curriculum, and perhaps that's what's coming in here a bit more as well.
We have,
Okay, knowledge based. Don't worry, I'll keep track of them all. So we have one. We have two there. We take together, please.
Hi, I'm from an organisation called National Numeracy, and we've just created an online programme called the National Numeracy Challenge, which is a resource for adults to develop their numeracy skills and confidence. I was wondering if you had any advice for developing growth mindsets via the internet rather than in a face-to-face context.
Great, online. And next to you, please.
Hi, my question is similar. I'm a talent development executive, so I work with in training in organisations. I was wondering, can you teach growth mindset with people who are a little bit older, and is that a training course or is that a cultural thing?
Okay,
What does
so
that look
partly
like?
about age and partly online. Great, okay. 5 questions, all very rich in their own way. First of all, about confidence and self-esteem.
Yes.
I mean, does it have a positive knockover effect on that?
confidence is easier to maintain within a growth mindset, because in a fixed mindset you have to feel, I know everything already, I'm not going to make any mistakes. But in a growth mindset, you just have to believe you can learn something over time. Also, self-esteem is repaired differently. In a fixed mindset, you look for easy successes or people who did even worse than you if you did poorly. But in a growth mindset, you repair your self-esteem by learning and addressing your deficiencies. So it's not that the level is necessarily different, but the whole process is different.
Okay, great. And the second question was a particularly good one. It reminded me of Thomas Young's The Rise of the Meritocracy, which broadly argued that the idea that somehow everyone gets to where they are based on their effort is very troubling. It makes people somehow they have no one to blame. They sort of, everything becomes a lot of pressure. So following on from that, is this all a bit too good to be true? I think is the sort of undercurrent there.
The growth mindset doesn't guarantee a result. It just says you'll probably get further if you engage in a deep learning
But if you're being
process.
really critical with yourself or playing devil's advocate, is there a potential negative
We
side of
have
it?
to be careful that people aren't blamed for their lack of success, because it's easier for effort to be successful if you have lots and lots of resources and networks and so forth. So yes, we're very mindful of that possibility.
So it's always effort in context. It's effort with support and resources and environments and so forth.
Yes.
Okay, great. And then the third question was that, we have a new national curriculum. More generally, curriculums that are based on knowledge comes back to the prior question about the way that policy is designed.
We have a national curriculum called the Common Core, and I have cautious optimism about it because it's more conceptually based. For example, in maths, there are fewer different concepts taught every year. Now there are 18 different concepts at each grade. It's more continuous across grades, but a lot will depend on the assessments, whether the assessments are same old, or whether the assessments tap into this growth of conceptual ability. Fingers crossed.
Do you have any idea of how to do that? Because the assessment seems to me always comes up, like almost any discussion of education, people, it seems to come back to if you can't change the assessment tools, forget it, because eventually everything will move towards that. Do you have a sort of magic bullet in that respect? How do you go about changing assessment practices?
You get the right team, and the team that created the Common Core, I am hopeful, will be influential in shaping the assessment.
Okay, great. And then finally, these last two questions, a lot of the work is with children, but to what extent does it work with grown-ups, and to what extent can you do it online?
Yes, there is work now showing that you can teach a growth mindset to adults, like business managers, and relatively enduring changes can take place. A former student of mine, Jason Plax, is doing work with elderly adults, showing that teaching a growth mindset can raise memory performance. Yes, it can be delivered online. Many of our recent interventions have been done over the internet. So we have been trying out programs now that teach a growth mindset in 1 or 2 sessions online.
Okay, great. Any more questions from Twitter, Matthew? Are we doing? Okay, PC's gone dead. Okay, technical problems, great. So sorry to everyone in the Twitterverse who's listening. We have time for one more question, I think, if anyone's got anything burning. Yes, one at the front here, please. Just wait for the mic, please.
I just wanted to ask about the title and the word potential, because obviously potential puts a limit on something.
Yes.
And I was wondering if you felt that was the right word to use.
Okay.
That's a great question. That's the 3rd time I've been asked that this week. And the question is whether saying potential or living up to or fulfilling someone's potential makes it a limited, finite thing. And I wasn't thinking of it in that way. We cannot know what someone's potential is. We never know what someone's potential is until they commit themselves and fully learn and grow in an area. But I will take this under advisement.
Well, thank you. And I suppose the last thing for me is that, having absorbed all of that and thought about it a bit, the one danger would be misrepresentation. Is there anything that you think people might do or have done that you'd be very keen that they don't do with your work? Is there any sort of common mistake that people make with regard to it?
Yes, sometimes people or educators believe that just exhorting children to try hard equals a growth mindset. And as we've discussed today, it doesn't. Or just thinking that teaching about the brain will instill a growth mindset, but you have to really show kids how they can have impact on their brain through doing difficult, challenging work.
Great. Well, that and more is revealed in the book Mindset, which is recently released, and it's a UK version here, and it's available outside. Carol's happy to sign copies for you. I'd like to thank RSA Fellows who made this event possible, and if you can join me in thanking Professor Carol Dweck.